J.D. Vance is currently the favorite to win the Republican nomination in 2028. I believe that Tim Walz / Josh Shapiro will probably end up being the Democrat ticket in 2028. I think that the donors would look to Tim Walz as a kind of successor to Kamala Harris, but I think the donors would want to find somebody who's not a woman and someone who's not of basically not a white race, because the Democrats are going to want to win the next election. And I expect their donors to try to find a quote unquote white boy, as Jasmine Crockett said in one of her previous podcast appearances. And I actually think that's the road they're going to go down. And so I think he'd also pick Josh Shapiro to be his running mate. I think he'd kind of see the error that Kamala made, and I think he'd make Josh Shapiro the nominee in 2028. I think J.D. Vance would pick Tulsi Gabbard as his VP pick in 2028. So you kind of have a full matchup between the two nominees, and we have the 2024 map pulled up here as well as on mapdudejackson.com in order for us to kind of review the previous state results. And so looking at the safe Republican states on the map, you have Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas. You know, these states are pretty solidly Republican. I mean, you're going to see a little bit of kind of a maxing out in North Dakota for the Republicans. Nebraska and the at-large district are going to be in that safe column once again. Those will be safe states. If you look here, they are in that safe Republican column, including the first congressional district. You have Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, and West Virginia, as well as South Carolina and Alaska. So that puts JD at 125 safe electoral college votes. Alaska, a 14-point margin. Last time it was about a 13-point shift. So you do have a 1-point improvement in the state of Alaska. You also have an improvement in, certain other states like, Louisiana, Mississippi. They're about similar margins, but they are slightly more Republican than what they were before. Alabama, a point more Republican. Tennessee, a little bit of a shift to the right, including Kentucky. It is like a point righter, including Indiana. And West Virginia has a little bit of like a 3-point shift to the right on this map. So, minimal improvements in some of the red states for Vance. He does improve in Utah by like about 4 points. In the state, 5 points. So that is also pretty interesting. But overall, minor shifts in the rural America. Texas and Florida, the Hispanic vote in this matchup ends up going even more in favor of in Tim Walz's direction. So you do have the state of Texas being a 15-point margin, and so does Florida, like both 15.5-point wins. So JD would expand his margins in these areas from the last election. And in Iowa and Ohio, you also have over 10-point wins, which puts them in the safe Republican column. They are basically Iowa at 15 points and Ohio at like 14.5 points when everything is rounded out. And then looking at the safe Democrat states, we actually even have Maine's 2nd congressional district in the safe Republican column. So that puts Vance at 219 safe electoral college votes. You do have, California, Oregon, and Washington being in the safe column for Walz, as well as Hawaii and Colorado. Colorado, it's about a point less Democrat than what it was in the last cycle, given the Hispanic trend, as well as a slight improvement for Vance with college whites. He does a tiny bit better with them nationwide compared to how Trump did with them against Kamala Harris. You also have Hawaii. It does end up shifting to the right by about 4 points. California, about a 1.5 shift to the right, as well as in Oregon, you have a very slight shift to the right, and in Washington. So very minimal shifts in this area of the country, like about a point each state moves to the left. Illinois actually ends up becoming more Democrat because the black vote actually ends up shifting back into the Democrat territory by about 2 to 3 points on net. So Illinois will actually shift a little bit back into the Democrat column, including the state of New York actually shifts 2 points to the right. Again, the Hispanic vote is shifting quite a bit in the Republicans' favor, especially in this hypothetical map. And we also have Massachusetts, Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont all in this column, as well as Delaware. I mean, they're fairly similar margins of victory in this election, except for Rhode Island. Rhode Island actually ends up shifting to the right by 3 points given the Hispanic shift. So it's just above a 10-point margin. It could fall below into the likely territory. And you do have Maine's first in that safe column. So that wraps it up for the safe Republican and Democrat states on either side of the electoral map. And then we can move on to the lean or the likely Republican states, that being the state of North Carolina at 5.7%. So it is like a 2-point shift to the right, like 2.5-point shift. You'd probably see Vance do a little bit better in the northeastern part of the state while holding most of Trump's gains from 2024. So that is a pretty fascinating development. And I actually think that's it for all of the likely Republican states. I think North Carolina ends up being the only likely Republican state on the map. For the likely Democrat states, you also have Virginia once again. It doesn't really budge from the last election. Very, very minimal shift, like half a point to the right. It doesn't really move given the suburban trends for Democrats, but Vance does make some slight gains in certain areas. But again, it just ends up being a 5-point margin once again in this election cycle. Now, interestingly enough, New Hampshire ends up being a 5.3 percentage point margin of victory, presumably because of the anti-incumbent status that New Hampshire has. It always swings away from the incumbent party. And so with Vance in office as the VP and the presumptive GOP nominee, I think that it's going to be quite difficult for him to win this. And this is a Republican +3 national environment, by the way, and he's not even winning New Hampshire. So that is going to be, it's going to more than likely end up trending left. I think that especially somebody like Tim Walz, I actually think would do quite better in New Hampshire. And I believe those are the only likely Democrat states on the map as well. I did actually forget to add Arizona and Nevada in the likely Republican column. They are both 7-point wins for JD Vance. Given the Hispanic shifts, you are seeing even more improvements in Arizona and Nevada for the Republicans. They did have pretty big shifts this cycle, with Nevada shifting about 5 points to the right and Arizona doing exactly the same thing, mostly due to some college whites reverting back to Trump, as well as some non-college voters, but mostly Hispanic voters, including in the Maricopa area as well as in the Vegas area. Those shifts definitely had an impact in these states, and I expect those, with Tim Walz as the Democrat nominee and JD Vance as the Republican nominee, I expect those trends to continue. Nebraska's second is barely in the lean column. It is almost a likely Democrat district. You can see here is a 4.9 percentage point margin, so it does shift to the left very slightly from the last cycle, barely ends up shifting to the left here. Maine, on the other hand, actually ends up shifting about 2 points in the Republican column from the last election, given its status as a more, by the time we get there, it is going to be less college educated. And so somebody like a Tim Walz and JD Vance, I think JD Vance would perform better in Maine in a future election. You also have New Jersey being closer this time around, with it only being about a 3.3 percentage point margin for Tim Walz, especially with Vance gaining in the national popular vote. You are going to see a little bit of a shift away from the Democrats in the state of New Jersey. You know, Passaic County, Vance would probably improve there. You'd probably see some minor gains in, you know, Atlantic and Cumberland, but you would see some of these Democrat areas get a lot closer. Possibly Bergen would probably flip. You'd have Middlesex get really, really close in 2028. So that's where you'd kind of see that shift. And then from here, you have these very competitive battlegrounds. Minnesota, again, I think would stay with Walz. It doesn't really shift from 2024 much, just 0.1 percentage points in the Republican column there. So not really much of a shift there. And we do see finally the state of New Mexico. This is the biggest shocker on the map and could potentially be the state that Vance wins in 2028 against Tim Walz. Is the state of New Mexico. Given the Hispanic vote shifting once again, you do have this state actually moving quite a bit into the Republican column by about like 4 points, actually, a little bit over a 4-point shift. So it barely stays in the lean column for Walz. It is really, really close. but it is a lot more competitive than it was even in 2024 when it was like a semi-competitive battleground. And then you have the Rust Belt states in Georgia, which all vote in unison in this cycle, granting Vance 312 electoral college votes to Tim Walz's 226 electoral college votes. Georgia ends up voting for Vance by 1.9%. So it's like a 0.3 percentage point shift to the left. Some minor gains in the Atlanta suburbs for the Democrats, but Vance will also gain in some places in rural Georgia. Maybe Walz reverts some of the gains. It's kind of like a wash, basically. But you do see Vance perform significantly better in the Rust Belt. You see he wins Wisconsin by 2.5 points this time. He wins Michigan by 2.9 and Pennsylvania at a 3.2 percentage point margin. So, you know, they're like basically all voting in unison, and they're kind of voting with the national popular vote at this point in time. And so that is it for this video. Vance gets 312 electoral college votes once again to Tim Walz's 226 electoral college votes. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this, and comment down below so you can actually suggest your own hypothetical presidential matchups, and I will conduct a video for each and every one of them. I will see you guys in the next video.